Backyard Bullion here, and a very warm welcome to you all back to my silver pouring bench, also known as the kitchen hob, where today we're going to pour some 100-gram silver bars into this mould here. We're also going to jump over to the stamping area, also known as my kitchen table, and we're going to do some afterwork on the bars that we pour today. So we're going to do some cleaning on them to get rid of any bits of graphite that might be still there once we've poured, and then stamping as well and making the bars look as good as they can be. It's not just about pouring some silver into a mould, and that's one of the reasons why we've got this kind of slightly odd looking contraption underneath here. So this graphite mould on top has a little bit of heat into it, so I'm going to just take that off with my gloves. But basically, pouring silver of exact weights is pretty difficult to get and make it look good. So I've got these weighing scales here. They look like they've seen better days. They used to have a glass top, but that shattered from the heat, and you can see the plastic melted a bit. But anyway, they still work to a certain degree anyway, not in any way super accurate, but enough to give us a good guide whilst we're pouring of how much silver is going into a mould. And it just helps me get an idea for my method, which is using hand-eye kind of coordination to judge how much silver needs to go in to get a specific weight. It does mean that we don't end up with exact weights though. So a 100-gram bar from a backyard bullion point of view could be as much as 105, 106 grams. And that's fine. A lot of people ask, why do we do that? I think it's important to have the best finish possible on your bars, and the different methods that I've experimented with, this yields the best looking bars by far. If you just put 100 grams in the furnace and dump it all out into the mould, you end up usually with a lot of graphite pollution on there, which distorts it all and makes it not look very pretty. And also the ripples often get very, very distorted or not even form at all, because the silver is usually splashing up the edges of the mould because you've had to use such force to get all the silver out of the furnace crucible. So lots of different methods are available. I found this one to be the best, and we're almost ready in fact to pour. So I'm just going to get the blowtorch back onto the mould to get some heat into it to avoid steam explosions. The most important thing that you can do as a silver pourer is to protect yourself, and heating graphite moulds is most certainly the thing that you should do every time you pour silver into them. So we are, as I said, going to make some 100-gram bars just now by the kind of hand-eye coordination kind of thing. We're not looking for exactly 100 on this here. It's actually a little under, so about 101 would be perfect. But you know, it's a guide. It's still very difficult to do because you've got to kind of keep your eye on the pouring of the silver, which is of course a very manual and important task which requires a lot of concentration, and then keep a watchful eye on the scale. Sometimes if it's like 96 grams, I have a little bit of extra leeway to drop a tiny more drop in before it fully solidifies. That's really the most useful time, but also it gives me an idea of if I'm way over or way under, and I can just pop the silver bar right back in the furnace whilst it's hot. So silver is hot and ready to go. Let's pour the first one and see if we can hit the mark. Oh, look at that, the scales went off just as I came in to pour. So, okay, we don't have the scales on, but that one looks like a pretty good attempt, actually, from experience. One of the things I will say is that experience and muscle memory sometimes is actually really quite important. So, from memory, these scales won't zero whilst there's all of this weight on it, so we have to quickly just zero the scales. And then we'll put the bar back on and see if we've hit the mark. So that says 106. From my experience, that is usually a little bit over, so that's probably about 104, 105 gram bar. So we are going to keep that one, and we'll use that as one of the examples. In fact, it's a really good example because it's got some graphite on it. I'm just going to quench it and then I'll be back. So here we are. Here is the result of that first pour. A very pretty piece with lots of lovely ripples, and a very good example of the graphite that comes out. Now, this little bit down at the bottom here hasn't distorted the ripples, which is perfect. It will clean off very easily. In fact, most of the time you can get most of it off, in fact, just with the abrasiveness of your fingers and a little bit of moisture. But we're going to soak that in some vinegar, and I'll show you that process in a moment. For now, I'm just going to charge up the furnace once again, and we'll be back in a moment to pour a second one, and hopefully you'll see it with the scales on. This time I'll keep an eye and make sure they're actually on when we do it. Okay, we are back to pour the next bar, and we've got the scales working this time, so hopefully you guys can see the numbers on the screen as and when we pour the silver in. There's only really one way to find out if we're going to hit the mark, and that's to try pouring some silver. So there you go, that's 102, so that was kind of a good example of getting it just right. If we're fast enough, we might be able to get one more. 99, a little bit extra. It's gone a bit high. So you can see it's a very fine margin as to whether or not you can get it just right within that first wave of silver coming in. This bar here is probably not one I will keep, as it's not really as perfect as I look for. And that tiny last little drop of silver as well, if you can see, yields a little lumpy bit in the middle, which is not really what I want. And there's also a little bit of distortion of the ripples and things because the silver wasn't quite as hot as the first bar. So that one is going to head back straight into the crucible. As it's piping hot already, it will be able to be poured. And then the other one here, nice bit of silver quenching. And this one is looking really nice. Some very interesting ripple patterns in that one. Two very distinct pools, which is nice. A little bit of graphite once again, but we'll show you how to get rid of that now as we head on over to the kitchen table for the second part of this video. Okay, the next part is by far and away more difficult than the actual silver pouring. It's the aftercare work that you put into the bar. So we've got the two that we poured here today, and the second one that came out is looking really nice. There's some smooth straight edges on all of the four sides. However, the first one that we poured, I have noticed there's this little, don't know quite how well the camera is going to pick it up, but there's this little kind of raised part here, which I want to try and smooth out a little bit. So there's one very easy thing to do with 909 fine silver, and it's very malleable. So you can actually just snip this off with a pair, I've got just a pair of like nail clippers here, pretty heavy duty ones, and it just shaves off that little edge of the silver, that raised portion, flattens it out just a little bit, which is what we want. And if we just get the majority of that raised layer off, it'll look a lot better. You can see a little bit of the scraps there. Put that to one side. We'll scrape all that off and reclaim it at the end of the session. There's also just a tiny little bit over here that I want to snip off as well. And you might be thinking, well, that's going to leave some scratches and not so pleasant parts of the bar, and you would be right. So what we then do is get some pretty coarse sandpaper. This particular one is 400 grit, and then you just go where we've clipped, so you can see kind of the edge there where we've clipped. It's not particularly attractive looking, but the sandpaper will smooth all of that out and make it look just fine. Just go over all of the different parts that you've clipped. That's looking good, and then we'll do the other side. There we go. And then what you want to do is you want to get some really nice fine grit sandpaper. So we've got here 5000 grit, and just go over the area where it was, and that will get it all nice and shiny. You can hear that squeaking sound. That's a good noise. That says that it's getting nice and smooth. There we go. So you can see that it's nice and smooth, hardly noticeable at all, and really very much nicer than it was before. Now, the other bit that we're going to need some sandpaper for is to get rid of some of the graphite that has come out onto the bar. So this one here is probably the worst of the two. It's got a little area of graphite pollution there, and this other one here, the second one we came out, has a little bit there as well. Now, there are a variance of different methods that you can use. The one that I've by far and away found as the best is to just use some vinegar, basically as strong a vinegar as you can, or a very, very weak acid. Personally, I just say go stick with vinegar. It does the job and you don't need to faff around with actual acid, which is of course not a great thing. And then you want to get your sandpaper, but this time as fine a sandpaper as you possibly can. I've got some old 7000 grit here, which I've had for like 4 years, this piece of paper. It's been used so many times that it is way more than 7000 grit right now. Hard surface underneath, put a little bit of that vinegar onto the paper. It's wet and dry sandpaper, so it's a really good one to use. And then just take your bar where the graphite area is with the vinegar and just use the sandpaper, use the edge. That's why I use this rubber block here, using the edge to get all the angles around into this particular bar. And you can even use your finger, because the coarse nature of the sort of fingerprints and skin will take off those top layers when they're all soaked in that vinegar. And that is pretty much it all off. So let's give that a quick dry. And then we can see, I mean, you can't even see where they were. They're all gone, and it hasn't distorted the ripples. The very fine nature of that sandpaper will not distort the ripples. Again, we're going to do it on this other one here. Get rid of this little bit of graphite schmutz. And you can see, see this little sort of black liquid there. That's just all the graphite in the vinegar coming off. So it is as simple as that. It just requires a little bit of legwork, a little bit of extra work to do. Sometimes the graphite can be a lot more deep, or it has higher I guess concentration, so you might need to have a little bit more elbow grease going into it. Like this one here hasn't quite all come off in the same amount of time as that first one, so we're just going to do a little bit of targeted work on that area, and we're pretty much there now. I'm just going to put a little dab of vinegar right on the bar. And like that, we're done. Give it a little clean. Oh, throw the bar around. That's not probably the best idea to do. There we go. Two very, very nice looking bars without loads of graphite pollution on them. That's what we like to see. Now, we're going to move over to some stamping. And stamping is always a difficult one for any silver pourer out there. And I know there's probably a lot of you who have always struggled with stamping. It is a learned skill. There is no better way to actually practice stamping than physically practicing stamping. So if you've got any scrap pieces of silver, or a piece of silver that you've messed up your stamp on in the past, then use that as a practice block. Your silver, you can just go and melt again if it's not quite perfect. Just use it as that practice block and you'll get a lot better with your stamping. So today we are going to be doing a brand new design which has been commissioned by a customer, and it's a very cool kind of dragon square symbol, and we're going to be putting this dragon at the top in the center. Ear protection is another thing I would highly recommend for anybody doing stamping, especially larger stamps, because the amount of energy that goes into them, it is quite loud, and that can be quite damaging to one's eardrums. And having had a significant ear infection last year that really crippled me, put me in hospital for like 3 days, I want to look after my ears. So getting your stamp in the exact location you want it, make sure you've got a really firm grip on it. I'm using a really heavy, big mini sledgehammer here for this one because it's a big profile stamp that needs a lot of force. And then it is really just as simple as hitting it hard, sure, fine, and making sure that you're confident with your strike as well. Don't move your hand that's holding the stamp. So be very careful and very prepared, and be prepared now for a very loud bang. So the most important thing about stamping is to have a big solid base underneath it. I've got this case hardened steel anvil which is properly strong. You can see here I'm just moving the stamp, moving the bar, so I know it hasn't jumped. One stamp at a time to make sure that your stamp has not jumped is really important, because if it does, you're going to get a double imprint. Now I'm just going to move the stamp slightly at an angle like this so that the left hand side is going to get a little bit of depth into it, and now the right, and the bottom, and the top, and then, as if by magic, the stamp appears in the silver. 999 silver is very malleable, so it's very easy to stamp when it's cold. You don't need to warm it up, heat it up. You don't need to do it whilst it's hot, straight from the furnace. I'm just going to put another deep stamp into this main design. And one more, a good measure. There we go, that's taken a lot more detail now. So there we have it. The amount of times that I've messed up stamps is probably uncountable, but as I said, practice makes perfect. The next stamp we're going to put on here is the 100-gram weight. One sharp, swift stamp like that. You notice I turned it upside down so I could see where it was in relation to the main stamp. So that is that one done. Now we are going to do the slightly different design, which is a triangular version of that stamp, and we're going to put that here at the top in the middle. The larger the stamp and the flatter the profile of the stamp, the harder it is, and you'll need more force or perhaps even a press to get it in. These are probably about as big a stamp as I can manage and make good with. So that should now have taken all parts of the design. Yeah, that's looking good. Quite happy with that. We're going to be antiquing these as well before they're finished, so these designs will just leap out from the bars once they're done. So last 100-gram there, done. So there will be a little bit more stamping that goes onto these particular bars, but I thought I'd just show the difficult ones there of how it comes together, which I think looks pretty good. You know, it's a learned skill, as I said. Just have to keep practicing at it. So that's the life cycle so far of these bars. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please do put a thumbs up on it and share it around on your social media. That would be very helpful. So I hope you've enjoyed today's video, and if you have, you know what to do. Put a thumbs up on it and share it around on your social media. And we'll see you on the next one. Have a fantastic week ahead. As always, please make sure that you like, share, comment, and subscribe for more.